dispute between him and Chabane. He says Chabane was shocked by the then president's instruction and disappointed to see him leave. Maseko maintains that Chabane received a call from Zuma instructing that he be removed. In his earlier testimony, Zuma denied this, saying it was a cabinet decision. However, the minutes for that decision are nowhere to be found. Let's get more on the story now. I'm joined in studio by reporter Mbalenhle Mthethwa. Very good afternoon to Mbalenhle. Let's speak about this issue where Maseko says that former President Jacob Zuma was not truthful when he spoke about his removal.
Yes, indeed. We have Themba Maseko making a second return to the Commission of Inquiry, and this time around he's come to basically respond to some of the allegations that were made by the former president, and he's disputed many of them. He says that there was no issue between himself and the then minister in the presidency, Colin Chabane, and he says that he still maintains that Colin Chabane did receive a phone call from then president instructing him to have him removed as the GCIS's DG, saying that he wanted the decision to be made as swiftly as possible, and that by the time he had returned from Addis Ababa at the time, he wanted him gone. Now, Colin Chabane at the time, because he had a good relationship and they had no bad blood between them, he felt that, he didn't want to throw him out into the streets, and therefore arranged for him to be transferred to a different department, which was the Department of Public Services and Administration at the time. And basically, what also proves Maseko's testimony is a performance assessment that was presented before the commission, where he scored somewhere around 114%. And we hear Judge Raymond Zondo asking him if it meant that he had performed gone above and beyond the call of duty and had performed beyond expectations. Let's take a listen to that.
When the score here reads 114%, that says to me, and I would imagine it says to other people who might not be familiar with public service performance assessments, it says to me, this person did beyond 100%. Is that a correct understanding of it?
Yes, there's a formula, a calculation of points. So there are objectives that are set, and numbers are allocated to that formula. So let's say human resource management or ability to manage your budget effectively. So a number of points will be allocated to that, and then there will be goals for the year in question, and those are things that are agreed to with your minister as your supervisor. So at the end of the period, we then go through that performance agreement, and then points are allocated.
Essentially what he's saying is that Minister Colin Chabane was actually a part of this assessment, and he was aware of the points that he was given. So it proves that, there was really no reason for him to be fired. And he says that his axing at the time came as a surprise, given that this assessment was done in December and he was then fired in February the next year.
Okay, talk to us about, obviously, the allegations or the testimony of the State Capture Commission needs to be tested. People can come and rebut it, even with evidence that they advance. So talk to us about what was said about the minutes of that cabinet meeting and the decision around him being moved or him being fired.
Okay, so the second thing that Themba Maseko has disputed is that this was a cabinet decision. He basically explains to the commission that there should be minutes from the cabinet meeting that sat and discussed his transfer. We know that former President Jacob Zuma testified that at the time there were a number of DGs that were moving around, and Themba Maseko also disputing that, saying that the only DGs that were actually moved around were himself and then DG, who's this person? Zwanele Manyi. Yes, those are the only two people who were actually moved around and transferred. So he's basically saying that is another untruth. And he says usually what happens is that when DGs are moved from one department to another is when there's actually bad blood or conflict between a minister and a DG. And this was not the case, because if he been underperforming, he would have been fired and thrown into the streets. But let's have a listen to what he has to say.
The decisions will then follow the same format. There will have to be a proper cabinet memorandum that states the recommendations, and then cabinet approves those recommendations. And the cabinet minutes will then indicate that the following decisions, which are recommendations, have been approved by cabinet.
Okay. So basically, he's basically saying that the minutes to this alleged cabinet meeting where his transfer was discussed are actually nowhere to be found. The only minutes that the commission has actually been able to find are those that were discussing the reappointment of then board chairperson, SAA board chairperson Dudumieni, among others. So it obviously speaks to the fact that these were all untruths that were spoken by the former president, and there's really no basis and there's nothing to support his transfer and his axing from GCIS.
So what happens next to the commission, Badenhle?
So right now the evidence that the commission is hearing is relating to the new age. So we are expecting Zonele Manye to then take the stand as soon as Themba Maseko is done with his testimony. So we do expect them to speak at length as to how the different departments were involved in the state capture project, as well as how the TNA newspaper at the time benefited from government contracts and government tenders. We understand that Themba Maseko lost his job at GCIS for not assisting the Guptas as requested by then President to assist them with regards to securing advertising for this little known newspaper that was coming up at the time.
Thanks so much for your time this afternoon, Badenhle Mthethwa, who is our reporter following that state capture story. Let's go to Durban now, where a man has been sentenced to